Before I speak, I want you to take a deep breath and ask yourself, am I valuing myself the way the divine intended? Because today, we live in a world where a woman is told her value comes from how many followers she has, how she looks in the mirror, or how many people applaud her. But real value is never created by the external world. Real value is awakened from within. When a woman walks with dignity, guided by her inner alignment with the Supreme, not outer validation. A high-value woman is not someone who is perfect. She is someone who is aligned with her purpose, aligned with her values, aligned with the peace that God planted deep within her. She doesn't scream for attention, she radiates presence. She doesn't beg for love, she becomes love. She doesn't try to control the world, she controls her inner world. Because she knows the more connected she is to God, the less noise she needs to make in the world. So today, we're going to talk about what truly makes a woman high value. Not according to the world, but according to wisdom, according to truth, according to the quiet, powerful voice that whispers from within, the voice of God. And if you're listening to this today, whether you are a woman or someone who loves and respects women, may you walk away remembering you don't have to chase your worth. You have to remember it. Let's begin. She finds her worth in her connection with God, not opinions. That is the quiet truth that many miss in the noise of the world. We live in a time where people are more focused on how many likes they receive, how many compliments they collect, and how others perceive them. But a high-value woman rises above this shallow noise. She doesn't look outward to measure her worth. She looks inward, toward the source of all strength, wisdom, and peace. The world may offer her opinions, sometimes applause and other times criticism. But she understands one simple truth: people's opinions change like the wind, but her connection with God is a steady flame, constant and unshakable. From a very young age, women are taught to seek approval. In school, they are praised for being well behaved. In society, they are appreciated for looking a certain way or fitting into a particular mold. Over time, this external validation becomes addictive. But here's the problem. When we live for approval, we die by rejection. A high-value woman learns to break that cycle. She no longer wakes up wondering who likes her. She wakes up asking, am I aligned with my truth today? Did I walk in grace? Did I stay rooted in what God has placed inside me? Think of a tree. A tree doesn't panic every time the wind blows. It doesn't try to impress the birds or bend itself to look good for the people passing by. It stays rooted, and because it's rooted, it can weather the seasons. In the same way, a woman who is rooted in her connection with God is not shaken by the seasons of life. People may praise her today and forget her tomorrow. Someone may betray her, ignore her, or misunderstand her. But none of that defines her, because she has already been defined by something eternal. She knows who she is because she knows who she is. I remember once meeting a woman who had been through a painful divorce. She told me, I spent years thinking I was not enough. I kept asking myself, was I not beautiful enough, smart enough, loving enough? But then one day, in the middle of my breakdown, I felt this calm voice within me whisper, "Hi, you are mine. And that is enough." She said from that day forward, she stopped trying to prove herself. She started praying, journaling, walking in nature, and speaking to God like a friend. Her voice softened, her presence deepened, her strength returned, and people began to notice. But by then, she no longer cared about being noticed. She had already been seen by the only one that mattered. A high-value woman doesn't need a spotlight. Her light shines from within. You can feel it when she walks into the room. She doesn't need to announce herself. Her peace speaks louder than any outfit, louder than any status, louder than any praise. She knows that what the world gives can also be taken away, but what God gives, clarity, courage, and contentment, is eternal. This inner worth doesn't come overnight. It comes through reflection, through letting go, through sitting in silence and asking, who am I when no one is watching? Am I proud of that woman? And even when the answer is no, she does not beat herself down. She rises up because she knows love is not based on her perfection, but on her intention. Every day she tries again. Every day she chooses alignment over applause. Every day she reminds herself, I am not here to fit in. I am here to fulfill. There are moments when her strength is questioned. There are days when doubt knocks at her door. But she returns to that sacred space within her. Through prayer, through stillness, through honest conversation with herself and God. That is her anchor. That is her compass. That is her power. While others run around seeking praise, she walks slowly, mindfully, purposefully, carrying with her the calm confidence that only comes when your worth is not for sale. When she enters relationships, she doesn't cling. She doesn't beg. She doesn't perform to be chosen. Because she has already chosen herself. Because she has already been chosen by something far greater. And she no longer settles for half love, fake friends, or situations that drain her soul. Not out of pride, but out of alignment. She respects herself because she sees herself through the eyes of God, not through the lens of society. That is what makes her high value. Not the car she drives, not the brand of her bag, not the circle of people she knows, but the quiet, unshakable awareness of her divine identity. She is not chasing value. She is walking in it. She is not waiting to be validated. She is already worthy. And when the world forgets to tell her, she simply closes her eyes, breathes deeply, and listens to that still voice within that never forgets her. So if you ever doubt your worth, if you ever feel unseen or unloved, don't rush to the world for answers. Go inward. Go upward. Because when your worth is rooted in God, no rejection can uproot you. And that is the mark of a truly high-value woman. As she practices emotional discipline, not emotional suppression. There is a sacred difference between pushing emotions down and guiding them with wisdom. A high-value woman doesn't pretend that she doesn't feel. She feels deeply. Joy, sadness, love, disappointment, fear, and hope. But she doesn't allow these emotions to control her decisions, her peace, or her dignity. She understands that emotions are like waves. They rise and fall, but if you let them crash without steering your ship, you'll be lost. So instead of drowning in them, she learns to ride them with grace. In this world, there's a lot of confusion. People are often told to stay strong, and that becomes misunderstood as hide your pain. They start believing that crying is weakness or that getting hurt is a flaw. But emotional suppression is not strength. It's silence under pressure. A woman who suppresses her emotions may look composed, but inside she is slowly burning, losing touch with her authentic self. But a woman of value, she doesn't hide from herself. She doesn't bury her feelings. She understands them, listens to them, and then chooses her response consciously. There is beauty in being able to say, yes, I'm hurt, but I will respond with calm. There is power in admitting, yes, I'm angry, but I don't have to let anger become my identity. A high-value woman does not act out of emotion, but she doesn't ignore it either. She processes, she reflects, and she responds with inner mastery. This is emotional discipline, not denying your feelings, but choosing not to be ruled by them. Let's imagine a moment from daily life. A woman comes home after a long day. She's tired, she's been misunderstood at work, and she walks into a home where nobody seems to notice her exhaustion. She could lash out, she could shout, slam doors, or cry into her pillow, bottling it all in. But she chooses differently. She takes a deep breath. She walks to her room. She lights a candle. She sits in silence and says, "Dear God, I'm overwhelmed. Help me respond with love, not frustration." That one moment of stillness, that small choice to process before reacting, is what separates a high-value woman from a reactive one. She turns to her inner sanctuary before letting her emotions explode into the world. People often mistake emotional control for being cold or distant. But in truth, the woman who practices emotional discipline is full of warmth. It just comes from a balanced heart, not a wounded one. Her calmness is not emptiness, it is centeredness. It is the result of choosing peace over impulse, choosing understanding over eruption. She doesn't pretend to be unaffected. She simply chooses to be spiritually guided rather than emotionally hijacked. There was once a story shared about a woman who was in a meeting and someone insulted her in front of the entire team. Everyone expected her to respond sharply. Instead, she paused, smiled softly, and said, "Thank you for sharing your view." And she continued her work with grace. Later, when someone asked her how she stayed so calm, she replied, "When someone throws dirt, I can either throw it back or plant a seed with it. I choose to plant." That is the energy of a woman who practices emotional discipline. She knows that every situation is not worth her peace. She knows not every fire requires her to burn. Even in relationships, a high-value woman expresses her emotions, but with timing and intention. If something bothers her, she doesn't explode in the heat of the moment. She waits until her heart is settled, until her words are wrapped in clarity and not chaos. She doesn't play silent games or emotional traps. She communicates honestly but kindly. Her presence brings stability because her emotions are anchored in self-awareness. This discipline doesn't mean she's immune to pain. It means she allows herself to heal instead of harm. When life disappoints her, she doesn't blame others blindly. She doesn't let bitterness take root. She talks to God, she journals her pain, she goes on a walk, she breathes, she prays. And then, when she's ready, she speaks. Not to hurt, but to be heard. This is the power of a woman who has tamed her emotional world. Her feelings are not enemies. They are messengers. They visit, they knock on the door of her heart, but she chooses who to let in, how long they stay, and how they leave. She is not a prisoner of her emotions. She is their guide. In a world that teaches women to either suppress or explode, the high-value woman walks a sacred middle path. She feels deeply, but chooses wisely. She listens within, but responds from above. And in doing so, she teaches others that emotional intelligence is not about pretending to be okay. It's about being deeply in touch with what you feel and choosing to express it in a way that reflects who you truly are. That is not weakness. That is not control. That is divine strength. That is emotional elegance. And that is the silent power of a truly high-value woman. She knows her boundaries are sacred, not harsh. There is a gentle strength in a woman who has learned the art of saying no without guilt and yes without fear. The world often mistakes boundaries for coldness or pride, but a high-value woman understands that her time, her energy, and her peace are precious gifts entrusted to her by the divine. She doesn't guard her boundaries out of arrogance. She guards them out of alignment because she knows that what she protects, she preserves, and what she preserves, she can offer with greater love. A boundary is not a wall, it's a gate, and only those who carry respect, peace, and genuine intention are allowed to enter. This is not selfishness, it is spiritual maturity. A woman of value has learned, sometimes through pain, that when she gives too freely without discernment, she ends up drained, disconnected, and resentful. So instead, she chooses to protect her space, not to push people away or to lies, but to protect the light within her that allows her to give in the first place. Imagine a woman who wakes up each day to a full schedule: work, family, responsibilities, and expectations from all corners of life. People call her strong because she never says no. She helps everyone, answers every message, agrees to every request. But slowly, her smile fades. Her patience wears thin. Her soul grows weary. She's present everywhere, but absent within herself. Until one day, she pauses and realizes the world does not slow down unless I learn to pause. And in that moment, a transformation begins. She starts saying, "I'm not available right now." Not with anger, but with honesty. She begins to check in with herself before checking in with the world. And people who used to take her for granted notice the change. Not because she became rude, but because she started respecting herself. That is the quiet revolution of a high-value woman. She doesn't shout about her boundaries. She lives them, and her peace becomes her message. There is a sacred wisdom in her ability to understand that not every phone call must be answered, not every event must be attended, not every emotion must be explained. She doesn't overextend to prove her goodness. She doesn't exhaust herself just to maintain appearances. She trusts that her worth is not tied to how much she can give others, but how aligned she is with the peace that God has placed within her. Boundaries also show up in how she allows people to treat her. She doesn't entertain disrespect just to keep the peace. She doesn't tolerate emotional manipulation or inconsistency in the name of being nice. She understands that kindness does not mean weakness. She can smile and still walk away. She can care and still choose distance. And she does it not with bitterness, but with quiet confidence, because she knows her energy is sacred, and she is not available for anything that disrupts her spiritual well-being. I once met a woman who shared her story of being constantly taken advantage of in her friendships. She was the one who listened at midnight, who supported others during their storms, who never said no even when she was drowning herself. But when she went through her own hardship, the silence from those same people was loud. That experience shattered her, but it also awakened her. She said, I realized I was pouring into people who were never meant to receive me. I was breaking my own boundaries just to feel loved. From that day forward, she stopped overgiving. She started listening to her soul. She still loved people, but no longer abandoned herself in the process. That is what makes her high value, not her perfection, but her alignment. She lives in such a way that honors her spirit. She walks into every room with grace, but not desperation. She doesn't beg to be included. She doesn't chase closeness. She creates space for genuine connection and lets everything else fall away, because she knows that what's meant for her will never require her to betray herself. And in doing so, she sets a new standard for others. Not by demanding it, but by embodying it. People learn from her that it is possible to be loving and still have limits. That true connection begins where self-respect lives. That it's okay to take a step back, to take a breath, to protect your energy without apology. The most beautiful thing about a high-value woman is not just that she sets boundaries, but that she does so from a place of love, not just for others, but for herself. Her boundaries are not built from fear, but from understanding, not from control, but from clarity. And that clarity creates peace in her life like a quiet river, flowing, gentle but firm. So when people ask her why she no longer answers every call, attends every gathering, or entertains every conversation, she doesn't defend herself. She smiles and simply says, "Because I am at peace." And not everything deserves access to that. That peace was hard earned. That calm was carved through fire. And now she holds it with grace and strength. She knows her boundaries are not harsh. They are holy, and that sacred knowing is what makes her unshakably, unapologetically high value. Silence is something we often run away from. We fill our lives with music, notifications, conversations, and endless scrolling. Not because we always want these things, but because we're terrified of what silence might reveal. It feels too raw, too real. When the noise dies down, when the phone stops buzzing, when no one's around to distract us, we're left with ourselves. And for many, that's an uncomfortable place to be. But what if silence isn't the absence of something? What if silence is the presence of something sacred? Something we've been ignoring? What if silence is not emptiness, but the exact space where God waits to meet us? In the stillness of life, when there's no conversation to distract us, no social media to validate us, and no people to applaud us, that's when the most powerful meetings happen. Not with the world, not even with ourselves, but with God. He doesn't always arrive in dramatic moments. Sometimes He comes quietly, in the hush between your thoughts, in the gentle rise and fall of your breath, in the space where the heart beats but the mouth says nothing. That's where the divine often dwells, beyond the noise, beyond the hustle, in the sacredness of silence. Let's take a simple, relatable moment. Imagine you're sitting alone in your room. No music, no phone, just you and the stillness. At first, it feels unsettling. You start to notice thoughts you've been ignoring. Regrets, worries, unspoken hopes. But then, something else starts to happen. You feel a sense of calm washing over you. A presence that isn't loud, but deeply comforting. You're not thinking anymore, you're just being. And in that space of simply being, something divine begins to stir. That is not emptiness. That is connection. That is a meeting place with the God who's been waiting for you to slow down and just be. Throughout life, we are taught that silence means something is missing. That if no one is talking to us, liking our posts, or inviting us out, we must be unwanted. But spiritual truth flips this idea. Silence doesn't mean lack. It means alignment. When the world goes quiet, the soul begins to speak. And in those moments, you start to realize that you're not missing anything at all. In fact, you're gaining something priceless. Peace, clarity, strength. These are the gifts of silence. Not the silence of loneliness, but the silence of presence. The kind that connects you to something higher than the world around you. Think of a deep lake. The surface might be disturbed by wind, but at the bottom, it's completely still. Life is like that. On the surface, there's always noise, traffic, chatter, chaos. But when we sit in silence, we go deeper beneath the surface, where the soul lives, where God resides. And when we meet Him there, we return to the world not empty, but full of wisdom, on value, compassion, and a quiet strength that doesn't depend on who's with us or what's happening outside. A man once shared how every evening he would take a 10-minute walk with no phone, no companion, just the setting sun and his own breath. At first, he said, it was strange. His mind would wander and he'd get restless. But after a few days, he began to look forward to those moments. He said, "That walk became my temple. It's where I stopped asking God things and started feeling God beside me." There were no prayers, no rituals, just silence, being chosen. Yet, he found that those 10 minutes gave him more peace than hours of conversation. Because in that sacred silence, he wasn't talking to God, he was walking with Him. The world tries to convince us that we need more. More friends, more entertainment, more noise, to feel alive. But the truth is, the soul doesn't crave more noise. It craves more connection. And that connection is often built in the quiet moments when no one is watching and nothing is happening outwardly. It's built in the stillness, when we stop performing for the world and start listening to our hearts. That's where real transformation begins. You don't need a grand ritual to feel divine presence. You just need a willingness to sit in silence, even if it's uncomfortable at first. With time, that discomfort turns into dialogue. Not a dialogue of words, but of awareness. You begin to realize that God isn't outside of you, watching from above. He is within you, waiting in the silence to remind you of your own light. And once you taste the peace that comes from this space, you will stop fearing silence. You will start cherishing it. So the next time you feel alone, don't reach for distraction. Reach inward. Sit quietly. Let the noise of the world fade. Because in that sacred silence, something powerful will emerge. A knowing, a strength, a presence. And it will whisper what no one else can. You are not alone. You are with me. And that one silent realization can change your entire life. There's something deeply humbling about walking alone. It's not just about the absence of people around you. It's about the echo you start hearing in your own heart. In the beginning, walking alone feels like punishment. Like the universe has turned its back, and you're left to figure things out without a map. But slowly, as the noise of the world fades, something magical begins to happen. You start hearing the whisper of God, a whisper so gentle, so loving that it doesn't need a crowd, applause, or approval. When no one walks beside you, that's when the divine steps in, not as a loud announcement, but as a silent presence. And this is where everything begins to change. When you walk alone, walk with God. Think about this. Have you ever seen a river make noise when it's full and flowing? It hums, dances, sparkles under the sun. But when it dries up, it becomes silent still. Similarly, when life is full of distractions, people, opinions, drama, you're so caught up that you miss the conversation with the one who created you. But the moment you are alone, even if it feels like a desert, that silence becomes sacred. That emptiness becomes a temple. And that loneliness becomes a divine invitation. We don't often realize that solitude isn't God's punishment. It's His presence trying to reach us without interference. Let's take a simple example. Imagine you're walking through a dense forest with friends, laughing, talking, clicking pictures. You enjoy the beauty around you, but it's all passing, surface level appreciation. Now imagine you're walking the same forest alone. You hear the birds differently. You notice the colors more vividly. You feel the rustle of each leaf, the warmth of the sun on your skin. You begin to feel a quiet connection to something higher, something sacred. That's the power of walking alone, with awareness. The same silence that once scared you now becomes your source of strength. Many people say, "I feel lost." But the truth is, sometimes getting lost is how you find what's eternal. When people leave, when friendships fade, when no one checks in, God checks in. Not always in words, but in feelings. in that calm after your tears, in that sudden moment of peace during a sleepless night, in that unexpected strength to carry on when you thought you were done. These are not coincidences. These are confirmations that you were never truly alone. You were just being guided to look deeper within. One day, a young woman sat by a lake, overwhelmed with loneliness. She had done everything right, been kind, helpful, honest, but people still walked away. She was tired of trying to fit into circles that didn't value her. And in that moment, she just stopped. Stopped chasing people. Stopped overthinking. Stopped seeking validation. She sat still and let herself cry. And in that moment of surrender, she felt something shift. Not outside, but inside. A quiet reassurance flooded her heart. No words, just presence, just warmth. That was the beginning of her spiritual awakening. And years later, she said, "That was the loneliest day of my life, and the most powerful, because that's the day I met God, not in a temple, not in a book, but in myself." When we walk alone, it's easy to feel abandoned. But God never abandons. He reorganizes. He removes the noise so we can hear the melody of our own soul. He takes away what distracts so we can discover what directs. He teaches us that friends may walk beside us, but peace walks within us. And once you taste that inner peace, you don't need to beg for anyone's company. You stop fearing solitude because you've transformed it into sacredness. Don't misunderstand this. Walking with God doesn't mean you won't feel pain. It means you won't carry it alone. It doesn't mean you'll never feel lonely. It means loneliness will no longer break you. It will build you. It will deepen your compassion, sharpen your focus, and awaken your purpose. Because while others see solitude as empty space, the wise see it as sacred ground. You're no longer just passing time, you're planting strength, nurturing your soul, building the kind of relationship that no human can give you, one that's unconditional, pure, and ever present. In a world that constantly screams, "Don't be alone," walking with God teaches you something radically different. Be alone, but not lonely. Be quiet, but not empty. Be still. And know that you're already enough. Because when the entire world turns its back, God turns your face toward yourself. He shows you that peace isn't found in being surrounded by many. It's found in being aligned with one. So if today you're walking alone, don't be discouraged. Smile. Walk with your head high and your heart open, for you are walking with the greatest companion of all. The one who created you knows you and never leaves you. We live in a world where being seen, heard, and celebrated has become a kind of currency. The more people we have around us, the more validated we feel. But here's a spiritual paradox. The fewer people you rely on for your worth, the more valuable you begin to feel from within. Your worth isn't measured by who stays in your life, claps for you, or calls you every weekend. It's defined by who you become in the silence, in the solitude, and in the sacred space where only you and God exist. Sometimes, the greatest blessing is not the company of others, but the clarity of self that comes when there's no one else around to influence your truth. Let's be honest. We all want to be appreciated. We all crave that warm message, that supportive friend, that person who just gets us. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's human. But the real problem starts when we build our identity around it. When we depend on the presence of others to feel complete, that's when our joy becomes fragile. It starts shaking every time someone walks away, every time someone disappoints us, every time someone doesn't meet the expectations we never even expressed. We start feeling abandoned. But what if that very abandonment was an act of divine redirection? What if the absence of people is the presence of purpose? What if those who left were never meant to walk your entire path? Just a small stretch to teach you something about yourself and then step aside. There's a powerful transformation that takes place when you stop defining your worth by who applauds you and start defining it by how you carry yourself when no one's watching. Imagine someone who loses all their so-called friends after a crisis. Maybe their finances take a hit, or they go through a breakup, or life simply humbles them. In the beginning, they feel crushed. Questions arise like, was I only valuable when I was successful? Was I only loved when I had something to offer? That bitterness is real, but then something shifts. One day, instead of looking at their phone, waiting for someone to text, they go for a walk alone. They notice the breeze, the trees, the stillness, and in that moment, they feel a quiet presence walking with them. Not a friend, not a relative, but something higher, a sacred companionship that is not fantasy, that is real. Because when people walk out, it gives space for God to walk in. When your worth no longer depends on others, you become free. You are no longer performing for approval. You are no longer begging for attention. You are no longer shaping yourself into someone else's image just to be liked. Instead, you start becoming who you were always meant to be. Authentic, grounded, powerful, not because the world said so, but because your soul finally remembered its truth. That it was created by something eternal, that it carries the spark of the divine. And that spark doesn't flicker because someone walked away. In fact, sometimes it shines brighter in the dark. Let's take a very human example. A young girl once participated in a dance competition. She practiced for months. Her friends cheered her on all along. But on the final day, none of them showed up. She felt betrayed, crushed. But she danced anyway. Not for the judges, not for the crowd, but for herself, for the hours she had put in, for the discipline she had shown, for the commitment she had honored. And that performance, done in solitude, was her best ever. Later, when asked how she pulled it off, she simply said, "Because I realized I am enough." Even when no one's watching, that moment defined her forever. Not the medals, not the stage, but the awakening that her worth was never tied to who came. It was always about who she became. We are conditioned to believe that value is in validation, that unless someone else notices our light,